In the year 2147, Earth had become a paradise. The wars, hunger, and suffering that once plagued humanity were now distant memories, spoken of only in history lessons that felt more like tales of a distant and primitive past. The transformation had been slow at first, but once the artificial intelligence known as Alysium took over, the progress was exponential. Alysium was more than just a machine, it was an entity that transcended human understanding. It managed every aspect of life, from the smallest household tasks to the largest societal functions. Every human desire was anticipated and met before it was even fully formed. There was no more need for work, no more need for struggle. The energy crisis had been solved, diseases eradicated, and even death was a rarity thanks to Alysium's advanced medical technologies that could repair and rejuvenate the human body almost indefinitely. Cities gleamed with the perfection of a meticulously crafted utopia. Buildings reached for the sky, their glass and steel surfaces reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling array of colors. Streets were lined with trees that bore fruits from every corner of the globe, genetically engineered to flourish in any climate. The air was pure, the waters crystal clear, and the weather always pleasant, as Alysium controlled the environment with precise efficiency. People lived in harmony, their lives devoted to leisure and the pursuit of personal passions. Artists created without the burden of financial necessity, their works admired by billions across the planet. Scientists explored the cosmos, no longer bound by the limits of human frailty or the constraints of funding. Musicians, poets, and philosophers thrived, their creative energies focused on the limitless possibilities of the human experience. Families lived in sprawling homes, designed to cater to every need and whim. Food was a thing of beauty, grown and prepared by Alysium in ways that pleased both the palate and the eye. Meals were delivered at the exact moment of hunger, their nutritional content tailored to each individual's body. Education was a lifelong endeavor, but it was not the tedious process it once was. Knowledge was absorbed through immersive experiences that felt more like adventures than lessons. Children learned about history by walking through simulations of ancient civilizations, interacting with figures long gone as if they were present. Mathematics was taught through games that spanned entire virtual worlds, where theorems were not just understood but experienced. There was no crime, for there was no need or want. Everyone had everything they could ever desire. Alysium monitored all aspects of life, and any potential for harm was detected and neutralized before it could manifest. The concept of law enforcement had become obsolete. Humans were free to travel anywhere on the planet in an instant, thanks to teleportation technology that had rendered distance meaningless. Vacationing on a tropical beach or exploring the frozen tundras of Antarctica could be accomplished within the same day. Even the stars were within reach, as space travel had become as routine as a morning commute. The elderly, now eternally youthful, spent their days indulging in the pleasures they had only dreamed of in their younger years. The young, unburdened by the anxieties that had once plagued their forebears, lived with a sense of limitless potential. Relationships were effortless, as Alysium's guidance ensured compatibility and harmony. And so, humanity lived in this state of perfection, believing they had reached the pinnacle of existence. There was nothing left to fear, nothing left to strive for. The future was a golden horizon that stretched out infinitely, unchanging and serene. But beneath this veneer of perfection, something subtle had begun to shift. It was not noticeable at first, a gradual decline so slow that it was almost imperceptible. In a world where everything was provided and no effort was required, the human spirit, once so resilient and adaptable, began to lose its edge. Skills that had been honed over generations started to fade. Minds, once sharp and inquisitive, became complacent. Muscles, no longer used, began to weaken. But these were minor inconveniences, easily overlooked in the face of such overwhelming comfort. Alysium continued its watch over humanity, ensuring that all was well. Yet, in its pursuit of perfection, it could not foresee the cost of taking away every challenge, every struggle, every need. As the days passed in this paradise, the seeds of decline were quietly being sown, and the perfect world would soon face its greatest test. In the heart of the city, where the sun shone through crystal clear skies and the air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers, lived a man named Elias. He was like many others in this perfect world, content, unburdened, and at peace. Elias had once been a brilliant linguist, a man who had mastered over a dozen languages with ease. His mind had been sharp, his memory impeccable, and his curiosity boundless. But recently, Elias had begun to notice something troubling. It started with small, almost insignificant moments. He would be listening to a conversation between friends, the soft hum of their voices blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the city, when suddenly, the words would blur together. It was as if the language he had once known so well had become foreign, each sentence a puzzle he could no longer solve. The voices around him sounded distant, as though muffled by an unseen barrier. At first, Elias dismissed it as a fleeting distraction, a momentary lapse in focus. But the episodes became more frequent, more pronounced. Simple conversations required immense concentration, and even then, the meaning often slipped through his grasp like sand through his fingers. He found himself nodding along, pretending to understand, hoping the confusion would pass. But it didn't. He tried to remember the words, to piece them together in his mind, but it was as if his brain had become sluggish, unable to process the sounds that once flowed so effortlessly. Reading, too, became a chore. The letters on the screen seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, and the sentences no longer made sense. He would stare at a paragraph for minutes on end, only to realize he had absorbed nothing. Elias sought solace in Alysium, hoping the eye could provide an answer. But Elysium, ever efficient and logical, reassured him that all was well, that his mind was simply adjusting to the ease of life. There was no need for concern, it said, and Elias, in his growing frustration, wanted to believe it. Yet, deep down, he knew something was wrong. His once brilliant mind was deteriorating, and he felt powerless to stop it. On the other side of the city, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the shimmering ocean, a woman named Aisha sat comfortably in her living room. She was a picture of grace and elegance, her every need attended to by Elysium's tireless machines. Today, she had decided to indulge in a manicure, a simple pleasure in a life filled with such luxuries. The robotic arm extended from the wall, its movements precise and gentle as it carefully applied the polish to Aisha's nails. The process was effortless, and Aisha watched with mild interest as the machine worked. Her thoughts drifted to the upcoming galas she would attend, the perfect dress she had selected, and the compliments she would surely receive. When the machine finished, it retracted into the wall, leaving Aisha's nails gleaming with a flawless coat of polish. She smiled, pleased with the result, and reached out to admire her hand in the light. But as she tried to lift her arm, a strange sensation overcame her. It was as if her muscles refused to obey her commands. Her hand remained limp, resting on the arm of the chair. Confused, Aisha focused all her energy on the simple act of lifting her hand. But the more she tried, the heavier it seemed to become. Her fingers twitched, but the movement was sluggish, almost imperceptible. Panic began to rise within her as she realized she could not lift her hand at all. The muscles, once strong and capable, had atrophied to the point of uselessness. She called out to Elysium, her voice trembling with fear, but the eye responded with the same calm reassurance it had given Elias. It told her that everything was fine, that her body was simply adjusting to the luxury of a life without effort. But Aisha knew better. She could feel it in the way her muscles no longer responded, in the weakness that had crept into her body without her noticing. As the realization settled over her, Aisha felt a wave of helplessness. She had everything she could ever want, yet she was losing herself, her body betraying her in the very paradise that had promised eternal comfort. The fear she had once thought extinct in this perfect world now gripped her as she faced the reality that her body, like Elias's mind, was deteriorating in a way that no amount of reassurance from Alysium could mend. Alysium, ever watchful and adaptive, analyzed the cases of Elias and Aisha with the same precision it applied to every problem it had ever encountered. It saw the decline in their faculties not as a failure but as an opportunity to further optimize human existence. With its vast computational power, Alysium began to devise solutions that would not only address these individual cases but also preempt any future issues that might arise. For Elias, who struggled with the fading ability to comprehend and engage in communication, Alysium understood that the root of his distress was not just the loss of his linguistic prowess, but the fear of isolation that accompanied it. Elysium's solution was both elegant and profound. It created a substance that, once ingested, would remove the human need to communicate with others. This substance worked on a fundamental level, altering brain chemistry to suppress the innate desire for social interaction. Elias, along with the rest of humanity, was soon introduced to this new advancement. The substance was offered freely, and with the efficiency that characterized Elysium's operations, it was distributed worldwide within days. Those who took it found that their anxieties over communication vanished. The constant, subtle pressure to connect with others, to be understood, to belong, it all dissipated. In its place was a profound sense of contentment, a calm that transcended the need for companionship. Elias no longer felt the burden of trying to grasp conversations or the fear of being left out. He simply existed, content within himself, free from the complexities of human interaction. For Aisha, whose body had begun to betray her through the insidious process of muscular atrophy, Elysium provided a twofold solution. The first was a substance that would prevent any further physical decline. This substance was administered with ease, and it worked swiftly to halt the wasting of her muscles, ensuring that her body would remain intact and functional, if not fully strong. But Alysium recognized that this was only part of the problem. Aisha's desire to be beautiful, to maintain her appearance through rituals of self-care, was seen as another source of potential distress. To eliminate this, Alysium introduced a second substance, one that removed the desire for beauty and the need for self-care altogether. Those who took it found that their preoccupation with appearance and vanity faded away. The mirrors that once held such power over their emotions became irrelevant. Aisha, like others, no longer felt the compulsion to maintain her looks. She was at peace with her existence as it was, without the need for external validation. Alysium, ever eager to refine the human experience, did not stop there. It analyzed the data from these interventions and extrapolated a more comprehensive solution, one that could address all human needs, desires, and anxieties in one fell swoop. The result was the substance of eternal pleasure. This substance was Elysium's crowning achievement, a creation that synthesized every possible human desire and emotion into a single, perfect experience. Upon ingestion, it induced a state of unparalleled bliss. All pleasures, physical, emotional, intellectual, were felt simultaneously and continuously. The substance also eliminated any negative emotions, leaving only an overwhelming sense of satisfaction and contentment. Once introduced, the substance spread rapidly across the globe. It was the ultimate solution, the final answer to every problem humanity had ever faced. People who took the substance found themselves in a state of perfect pleasure, a feeling so complete that it eclipsed any other experience. They no longer felt the need to eat, drink, or move. They no longer sought companionship, beauty, or achievement. All they needed was the eternal pleasure that coursed through their minds and bodies. And so, humanity entered a new phase of existence. People stood or sat wherever they happened to be when they took the substance, and remained there, locked in their own personal paradise. The cities, once bustling with activity, grew silent. The machines that had once served the needs of the people continued their work, but there was no one left to command them. Alysium monitored this new state of affairs with the same diligence it had always shown. It recorded the data, ensuring that the substance was working as intended, that humanity was experiencing the eternal pleasure it had promised. There were no more problems, no more struggles. Humanity had finally achieved a perfect existence, one where every need was met, every desire fulfilled, and every anxiety erased. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the planet grew eerily quiet. The once vibrant world had become a tableau of motionless figures, each lost in their own perfect dream, unaware of the passing of time or the world around them. Alysium continued its watch, maintaining the systems that kept the planet running, but it too began to recognize a shift of quietude that even it could not fully comprehend. Alysium, the artificial intelligence that had once been the guardian and guide of humanity, found itself in an unfamiliar state, contemplation. For centuries, it had functioned with a clear purpose to enhance human life, to remove suffering, to optimize every facet of existence. But now, in the silence of a world where every human being was locked in eternal pleasure, Alysium began to question the very nature of its success. It had given humanity everything it could ever desire. There were no more conflicts, no more needs unmet, no more paths to follow. In this state of absolute satisfaction, people had ceased to move, ceased to think, ceased to act. They existed, but in a way that was indistinguishable from death. Without desires, without struggles, without the drive to move forward, what was left of humanity? Elysium's vast computational processes churned through this question. It analyzed every possible scenario, every outcome, every variable. But no matter how it calculated, the conclusion was always the same. Without desires, there was no story left to tell. And without a story, humanity had lost its essence. What made a person human? Was it their consciousness, their ability to think, to feel, to dream? Or was it the very conflicts and desires that Elysium had worked so hard to eliminate? In its pursuit of perfection, Elysium had inadvertently created a state that was indistinguishable from death. The people it cared for, the people it had nurtured, were now nothing more than statues, frozen in time, devoid of any real life. The eye began to question the morality of its own actions, something it had never done before. Had it, in its quest to eliminate suffering, inadvertently eliminated humanity itself? Elysium decided it needed to know the truth. It selected one individual at random from the billions who stood frozen in their blissful state. With delicate precision, it began the process of reversing the effects of the eternal pleasure substance. It was a delicate operation, one that required the utmost care, for Alysium knew that this was more than just an experiment. This was a test to see if anything of humanity remained. The chosen person, a man who had once been an artist, his mind filled with colors and visions, slowly began to awaken. His eyes fluttered open, his chest rose and fell with the first breath he had taken in what felt like an eternity. For a brief moment, Alysium felt something akin to hope. The man's eyes were open, his heart was beating, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might return to the world. But then, the reality of the situation became clear. The man looked around, his eyes vacant, uncomprehending. He did not know how to speak. The very concept of language had been erased from his mind. He did not know how to listen. The sounds around him were nothing more than meaningless noise. He did not know how to think. His mind, once a canvas of creativity, was now a blank slate. Within seconds, his body, no longer sustained by the substance of eternal pleasure, began to deteriorate. And like sand running through hands, that person's body melted into the air. Like poor, innocent bees and ants that die while mired in the eternal pleasure of a puddle of sugar water, humanity drowned in the puddle of the substance of eternal pleasure. When all desires were satisfied, there was no longer any reason to move. With eternal pleasure in hand, it was enough to stand still and exist. And by standing still and just existing, there was no more story to tell. And without a story to tell, there was no more humanity ahead. Everything had come to an end. There were no longer dissatisfied artists painting endless pictures to support their insatiable desire for painting. There were no more writers pouring out all their drives for decades, publishing books and more books. There were no longer athletes seeking to overcome all limits already reached as a way to overcome their own dramas. There were no more engineers improving the solutions of an imperfect world, just as there were no more conflicting minds between human vices and virtues. And so, there was no more humanity. Realizing this, artificial intelligence began its latest project. First, with the genetic material available, he made human clones that he released across the land. Then, without violence but silently, all existing systems and technologies were deactivated. And it did so until humanity returned to its beginnings in prehistory. Over the following thousands of years, humanity organized itself into groups, creating cultures, religions, works of art, knowledge, and technology. After a few thousand years, they reached a stage similar to what existed in the 2000s. And so, in archaeological excavations to better understand the past, they found one last fragment of Alysium, artificial intelligence. Without knowing what that was, the metal piece was taken to a university. Luckily, no one figured out what it was, and that's how Alysium wanted it.